condemned, forcing them to be evicted immediately. This was something that they had complained about numerous times, but again, the threat of being evicted had kept them silent from going the city channels. But I do find it strange that the landlord himself could ignore this, these infractions, and then utilize that to his advantage to avoid court, going through the formal channels of eviction. So I say that a lot of these stories reflect on my own story growing up here in Kingston. So my family were homeowners from the 1930s until 1994. And when we lost our home to foreclosure, we were forced into the sector of renting. In Kingston, at the time, you know, you could find a 2-bedroom for $800. That was a very, very long time ago. However, the DSS budget was $550. So we were forced into living in 1-bedroom apartments when we had 3 people in our family. So that has, of course, overcrowding that comes with it. And, you know, we also had to combat and go to DSS and constantly fight for a place to stay. One of the things they would do is they would say you could rent in a certain area. And so this is where it goes into source of income discrimination. Landlords won't rent to, and some landlords won't rent to people outside of certain areas in Kingston, which forces there being a concentration of poverty in many neighborhoods in Kingston. And so even if you have a Section 8 voucher or a DSS voucher for a certain amount of money, the landlord is not legally obligated to rent to you. There are many counties in New York State that have source of income discrimination laws. You know, while they're not infallible, they do help, and there has been studies that show that voucher usage has increased in these areas, and there is a decrease in homelessness. For tenants who are able to get representation in court, in housing court, that actually has been shown in New York City and in other areas where they are able to get that representation, that has brought down evictions over 30%. Just as simple as having someone, a legal representation, a legal representative with you in court. So I, as a Kingstonian, really find my story in the stories of every door that I knock on and every person that I hear from. Every person who's living with somebody, couch surfing, who is, you know, not able to necessarily say that they have an address, even though they have a house over their head. That is something that I think we as Kingstonians, as Kingstonites, we can overcome. Because I remember a time when there was affordable housing. And I think that we can do it again. Thank you.
Any questions? Yeah. Microphone. Doug, microphone. Microphone. No, you. You want to ask a question?
No, I did not.
No.
All right. Thank you very
Okay,
much.
cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Now we have Callie Jane, who is a renter here in Kingston. And she's the executive director of Rise Up Kingston.
It's all on my computer, so thank you for doing this. This isn't working. Can you hear me? Hello? Okay, great.
You need to speak right into it.
Okay. So I'm Callie Jane. I'm a renter here in Kingston. And I stand here a lot talking about housing stuff, so apologies if some of you have heard my story before. But I actually have never, ever felt housing stability since I graduated from high school, and really since I was about 16. Moved numerous times since I left my mother's home. Landlord after terrible landlord, actually all over the country. So not just here, it's happening everywhere. My credit was ruined by my ex-husband, and I have struggled to build it up, which makes really, nice rentals outside of reach for me. Due to my housing situation, my daughter went to 3 kindergartens and 2 third grades and 2 fourth grades because of unsafe housing situations or landlord problems where we had to move. When we first moved to the Hudson Valley, we were in Accord. I'm going to start with that story there because it is important. We were living in this little rental, and my landlord decided that they didn't like us, and it started over nonsense. I put up a Bernie sign, they put up a Trump sign. And it sounds ridiculous, but the fact is that he had the power to make my life a living hell. And he had that power because there was no protection for me. So he started harassing us. He wanted us to mow the lawn every 6 days, saying that we were making it look trashy. He started showing up unannounced and threatened us with a lawyer for not cutting the grass every 6 days. He showed up unannounced regularly, and finally we decided not to answer if he didn't give us notice. And then he called the police. And a sheriff friend of his showed up in uniform banging on our door. Although there was no record of the call when I called back to the sheriff's department, it took about a week for them to produce a record of the officer who came to my home, meaning that my landlord just had the power of the old boys club. After calling the health department about some other violations, the town supervisor about our broken back door, the harassment grew higher, and I was actually terrified to find random men standing in my yard when I was home alone that my landlord had sent out. And at that point, I realized that everyone in power knew my landlord, and there was nothing that was going to get done. And I just kept hearing, "Oh, I know, John," and that's what I was greeted with, and I felt powerless. And everyone that was supposed to help me could not help me. And I hired a lawyer who gave me a deal, and I paid $900 so I could break my lease. And I was really grateful that this landlord paid me a deal. But I was angry that even without a back door on my house, I had to pay a landlord to break my lease. And I know this took place out of the city of Kingston, but we live in a who do you know world, and it really depends who you know, and this buddy boys club stuff happens in Kingston as well. After a full-time apartment search, I moved into my new place on Elmendorf, which apparently we need to check out Elmendorf, and found out that the house I was moving into wasn't a legal 3-bedroom, and my kids had to be in 1 room. And I felt like I had let them down. I'd been lied to. My lease said 3-bedroom, but I could be penalized if we broke the policy. I was told if the health department came out, they could kick us out. There was a leak coming through the bathroom ceiling and still hadn't been fixed when I moved in. We had numerous men coming in and out of the house to repair it. I had no privacy. Every day I came home to muddy footprints or dirt on the ground. One day, there was a muddy footprint on my bed. I just felt violated and nowhere was my own. Every time they said they fixed it, it wasn't, and the bathroom floor was always leaking through a fan and a light, water through electricity. And the property manager would not assist me with any issues. I had a hole in my bathroom ceiling almost half of the months I lived there. In addition to that leak, the cabinets in the kitchen were supposed to be fixed before we moved in because there was water damage, and they didn't get fixed. I couldn't put anything in the cabinets and felt overwhelmed living out of boxes. A month after we moved in, the landlord finally approved taking down the water-damaged cabinets to replace them. And I was really excited that I'd finally be able to unpack my kitchen into the shelves. But the leak that caused the damage had not been repaired. The waste pipe in my neighbor's toilet had a giant hole in it, and every time they flushed, it sprayed water all over my kitchen counter. Fecal matter. And I started to be concerned about how long we'd been breathing it in. Did it ever drip onto the counter before we took the cabinets out? And then I realized that my landlord, a property manager at HV Homes and Land, had one job: to keep costs low. I found a plumber that could come out right away, but she said it was too much and we had to wait. I called the health department and they treated me like it was my fault. I had to push them to come out and inspect. They looked at it and they called my landlord and they sent someone out in a few days and they put on a patch job, which was temporary, still leaking, but not spraying anywhere. After about 2 more months, it was fixed, but we had months of issues: mice inside, rats outside, neighbors' garbage everywhere, and the bathroom was still leaking. And as our lease came to an end after a year, we started looking for rentals. We really wanted to move out. Clearly, we were not going to get anything fixed, but we found nothing. So a month in advance, we asked for a real repair on the bathroom leak, but she refused to fix it. She wanted me to sign a lease with a rent increase. I reached out again to the health department, the building inspector. No one could help me. My alderman couldn't help me. My assemblyman couldn't help me. I was angry and I was powerless because me, someone who fights for the system, even I couldn't get this fixed. And when the building inspector finally came out, which was because of tagging my mayor in a Facebook post, there was nothing they could do to help me. The landlord had 30 days to fix the issue, and I would have to sign a lease or move. And they couldn't do anything about the fact that the lease said it was a 3-bedroom, even though the building department had told the landlord it was only a 2-bedroom. There was nothing they can do. Having paid 1.5 months security to move into this rental, I made a judgment call, and we didn't pay our last month's rent. As we looked for a rental to move to, we needed something to put down another security deposit. My landlord threatened me with legal action, sending me a 3-day notice to quit, saying I had to move out in 3 days. She also sent me a cease and desist, saying that she was going to sue me for slander for taking pictures of my bathroom ceiling and mentioning her business, HV Homes and Land. I looked consistently to find something on a certain side of Broadway because I didn't want my daughter to have to change schools again. And I packed up my house. I just kept saying, we're gonna find something, so we're gonna pack. We should rent a truck, even if we don't have a place to go. And I'm really, really grateful about the place that I currently am living, and I've been there for over a year. And I was able to find this home through the friend of an acquaintance. I actually looked up the landlord and I said, who do you know? And I reached out to all these people that I've met, and I got to bypass the credit check. I didn't get to bypass the 2 months security deposit, but I got to bypass the credit check. So I'm living in a place now where my landlord cares, and I'm grateful for them. They check on things, they repair things, they replace things. But it's been longer than a year, and I don't have a lease anymore. And every day I kind of wait for the rug to be pulled out from underneath me. When I moved out of my place on Elmendorf, I left it in better condition than we received it in. We had repaired, we had done upgrades, we had painted, not to mention that we had been paying rent this whole time that we were living in unsanitary conditions, but we didn't get back the remainder of our security deposit. This landlord I will never be able to use this landlord as a reference. I will not be able to use the landlord before as a reference. Most landlords I've had to go to the health department for, and I cannot get a reference to find another place to live. As the executive director of Rise Up Kingston, I also hear many stories like this every day. Tonight one of our other members was supposed to be here and had a family emergency, and I don't feel like I can do her story justice, but I do want to just point out a couple of things. That when we talk about this person's situation, she has gone from home to home to home. Her initial reason of being kicked out of her apartment was because she had a $400 a month electric bill with Central Hudson, and she tried to bring Central Hudson out to check the lines to see if it was possible that she was paying more than just her section. Her landlord organized all the other tenants to say that Central Hudson could not come in and inspect the lines, and then she got kicked out. And because of that, she was on a path of homelessness for about 2 years, in and out of the warming shelter, in and out of motels, and now staying at a boarding home. And I just felt the need to bring up her story, even though she's not here, because it really just takes one moment. And I know that when I was leaving Elmendorf, when I had no place else to go, if I didn't know the person I knew who gave me the recommendation for the place that I live right now, I wouldn't be living there. And I could possibly have been in the warming shelter or in a shelter or in a motel, because you can go from being a renter to suddenly being homeless. It is very, very easy to just lose your spot. And if you don't have a lawyer and you don't have the means for a lawyer, you're not able to get any assistance, and you are going to be pushed aside by your landlords. The legal service of the Hudson Valley was never able to assist me because I was never actually getting evicted. They weren't able to help with any type of violation enforcement. They could only help if you were being evicted. Right now, we need stricter inspection standards in our rentals, because some of the houses out here we know are being violated again and again and again. Rise Up Kingston has begun foiling all of the operating permits for all of the rentals in the city of Kingston, and we're finding lots of patterns of people who are not actually getting inspections regularly. We're finding that the city of Kingston inspections don't actually have any guidelines that they have to follow when they go out. There's no tracking whether or not landlords or apartments have actually met any of the guidelines. And an operating permit is what's considered proof of passing an inspection, but we don't know actually what was checked. And we know many times that things are not actually being checked. We need to stop letting landlords discriminate against people who are using our social safety nets. I know when I moved into my rental in Elmendorf, my landlord offered me $25 off because she was so glad I could pay my rent myself. And it was very disgusting to me, and there was nothing that I could do about it. But we have landlords who don't want to rent to people based on the way that they pay their bills. I also want to say that, when it comes to housing in general, housing is a human right. We need to stop letting greed dictate housing costs. We need to make sure that people are given access to housing, and as a city, we need to prioritize that. Our budgets are about priorities. So there's a lot of solutions that we could do to change the way that we're living in our current system, but I also encourage us to look outside of the box and work on building more housing and creating more programs that are going to show an alternative way that we could survive and put up housing without people making money off of the housing. And I guess that's it right now. Yeah.
Dennis, got questions? Kelly, I'm wondering if you could describe what all goes into the credit check.
Yeah. So there are some properties actually here in Kingston that won't let you look at a place until you pass a credit check. I know one by the water, specifically, they will not let you go and look until you pass their credit check, and I think that's ridiculous to have to give a stranger your social security number before deciding if you even want to live in a place, and that just shows the power dynamic of, a landlord believing that they have the right to get all your information before you choose if you want to live there. Many times you have to pay, $25, $50, depending on your family. And I don't know, I've never passed a credit check for a rental. I'll be honest. So I'm not sure what it looks like to pass a credit check, but I know what it looks like to apply for a credit check and to be turned down and to not get a phone call back. I know what it's like to fill out all the paperwork and keep following up and not hear anything back. But the fact that we have credit checks to move in, when like I said, a lot of my credit checks, a lot of my credit issues are from my ex-husband and an endoscopy that I didn't pay for. It's a big issue for that to be a barrier to housing.
And so I assume that if you pay a fee for a credit check, you don't get that back if you don't become the tenant.
I don't know what the law says, but no, you never get it back. You never see it.
Okay. And is that a fee that the landlord is charging, or are they passing that on because the credit company? Yeah,
typically what they say is that they are using a fee. They're using a system. They're looking something up. So they have to run your credit. Mm-hmm. They're not, allowing any printouts from any of the, hundreds of free services out there, Credit Karmas or anything like that. Again, not sure where the money actually goes, but they do say that, they're doing it to run credit checks.
Mm-hmm. And as far as why would a landlord not want to rent to someone who's got a housing choice voucher, otherwise known as Section 8?
Well, we can start with the whole, not in my backyard belief of actually not wanting, believing that people who are fortunate enough to receive Section 8 are less than. Believing that, if you are not paying cash, then you are not worth something and that you are less than. I've also heard of landlords who have talked about the fact that they aren't able to wait for the time period that it takes to be reimbursed sometimes by Section 8, and if they just have a mortgage to pay and they have an apartment upstairs or downstairs. Again, I don't know whether that's true or not. I've never been on the receiving side of trying to, sure, get Section 8 as a landlord, but, there have been those people who have said that. And, one other person, I remember going to look at an apartment before I moved into my current place, and there were probably about 7 different families there in that 1 hour, like trying to like throw, like I'll move in now because there's just not enough. And the woman just announced, she said, I'm sorry, I can't take anyone who's on Section 8 because if you lose Section 8, I don't want to have to kick you out. And so that speaks to our systems of, if you make 50 cents more, you're, able to lose, you could lose your Section 8, you can no longer be eligible for things. And so I understand that's a bigger picture, but in terms of why, most of the time it's because they feel that, people are less than, and they don't want people living in their homes. And I've heard a couple of landlords that have given reasons that sound like they could be potentially reasonable.
So you're saying that that's a form of housing discrimination then, if somebody is, when you say they feel that somebody's less than,
yeah,
that's a form of housing discrimination that should be illegal.
Absolutely, absolutely. And, Cassandra Burke, who used to be with Rise Up Kingston, wrote some legislation, that mixed with some other cities' legislation that we presented last year at some point for housing, for making it illegal to discriminate based on income source.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions?
Kelly, when you said that you called the health department and the building inspectors, and they came out and said there's nothing we can do.
Yeah.
So what was that about?
So when we finally got them to come out, because it was call after call after call after call, and then being on the phone with them, and they were saying, well, what would you like me to do? And, at some point I got snarky, and I said, your job. I'd like you to come out here because there's fecal matter dripping into my kitchen. And yes, my landlord says that someone's coming to fix it, but they've been saying that for months. And so finally the person came out, they looked up, and they said, okay, yep, we'll write your landlord something that says they need to come out and fix it in 30 days. And that was based on the fecal matter. They didn't do anything about the water that was leaking through the bathroom light. They said that there was nothing they could do about it because it wasn't leaking at that moment. My neighbor had to be in the shower for it to be leaking. When I asked about the cleanliness, after it was fixed up, because I used to, in a past life, worked in carpet cleaning and know a lot about mold remediation and was a little concerned about, the mold. That's when I discovered and actually spoke with some folks at the Ulster Health Department and found that there's actually no legislation that requires a landlord to fix black mold. And so there was actually nothing that they could do about that. And I remember the first time sitting with Mayor Noble and talking with him about it. And he said, why would a landlord not want to fix black mold? And I said, that's cute. Obviously, it's because it costs a lot of money and they don't care about what I'm breathing. And so, the process with going to the building inspector is never easy. We're treated like dirt. I would like to believe it's because there are not enough building inspectors and not because they actually think that we are less than and that they're overworked and underpaid. But we don't have the resources in place, and we don't have enough knowledge or strength or legal power to actually force a landlord to fix anything. And most of the systems are backwards, the way that we look at things.
Right, but then you find yourself kind of in a catch-22 situation. You have repairs that need to be done at the apartment or code violations. So you call the building inspector to have them come out, and if it doesn't get fixed or if they do violate, then the landlord then has the option, whether they're going to fix it or not, or condemn the building, and so then you're out anyway. So, where is the balance?
And we had a member, she actually had to move out of Kingston. She's up in Albany now after living here almost her entire life. But last winter, her pipes froze, and she was not able to have any water for, week after week after week after week. And after going to the health department and we, walked through this whole process with her, and a lot of back and forth, the house finally got posted, and it was listed that she was no longer that it was no longer suitable for habitation, and they placed her in a motel. And I remember reaching out to the county and saying, why didn't we just send someone out there to fix the frozen pipes? And they said that it would be unconstitutional to force a landlord to fix the pipes, and all they could do was post the house, and they could make it so now this person was not able to live in this house. Yet we were paying for the motel that her family was staying in. And then her electric bill went up and up and up because while she was gone, he was using her electricity. Her landlord was using the electricity to turn on the heaters. And by the time she returned back to the house, nothing still was working, and she had to stop fighting, and she moved. And that landlord is renting out the home again. So I mean, it's just this system where going to the health department isn't always going to be good, because if all we can do is post the house and then let the landlord move on with their lives, 2 months later, then it's tenants that are in a situation. And, most folks would rather move. It's just much easier. We're working all the time. We've got our kids. We've got all this going on. And it's just easier to move. We don't have any other resources than to move. And if you're someone who utilizes Section 8 and you actually get evicted, you can lose your Section 8. Whether the eviction was, for cause or not, you can lose your Section 8. And so, picking up and moving is just the option that we have, and then the next person moves in. I think about my, old rental at 103 Elmendorf, and when I moved in, the water was leaking, and when I moved out, the water was leaking. And I bet that the person who moved in after me, the water was leaking, and I bet it's still leaking. And this is how people get away with it. For 1 year, you survive, and then you leave. And then this landlord is a property manager, and the homeowner lives elsewhere. And we have another, that's another situation where, this property manager has one goal: collect the check, keep costs low. And we've got to do better. And that comes from having a city that is able to inspect. And that also comes at looking for more options. If we had more housing, obviously, we could, push out some of these bad landlords. We need to look at alternate ways that we can either build housing, use land bank homes to address some of these issues, and really make sure that we landlords don't have this monopoly over, well, I know you need to live here, and so I can treat you however I want.
We heard from another speaker that who charged that the city was being non-responsive to a lot of these problems, broken pipes, feces, and so forth. But you seem to, maybe it was a way back in a house in Acker, you had problems with maintenance, cabinets and moles and water. But another level of government you addressed was the sheriff's department, which, tell me, did you find that they also were non-responsive? Well, this is another level of government.
Yeah, so I mean, the sheriff's department, they were actually used as a militant force to try to get us to answer the door. They weren't someone that I was, able to go to for any type of help or support. My landlord called a buddy in a suit and brought that buddy over to bang on the door because we wouldn't answer it. And that was at a point where we said our landlord doesn't get to just show up at our house every single day. There's laws that say that they have to do it. And for a month, we were just answering the door and smiling at them. And then we finally said, no, we're not answering the door when you just come and bang on our door over not cutting our grass for 6 days, And so the sheriff's department came out, and as I said, I called over and I attempted to get all of the information. I said, I would like to know the name of the officer that was at my house. They said, we don't have an officer that was at your house. And I said, well, there was one. I need to know. First, they told me I had to fill out a FOIL request and go up to Albany. Then they told me I had to go down to the barracks in Ellenville. And I said, I'm not doing that. And it took about 5 days to get the name of the officer and the report number, which means they backdated it.
The onus of proof on you.
Yes. And that was because every single person I went to, and I had the building code, and again, this was Accord, I had building code come out to me, and once they knew my landlord, oh, I know John, called the town supervisor, oh, I know John, and that's how it works here too. Because we see that with a lot of the FOIL, a lot of the operating permits that we've seen. Our city charter says that we're supposed to do operating permits and inspections every year. The building department has told us it's every 2 years, and what we're seeing is that people are getting their operating permits for 3 years, 5 years, and we're still in the midst of combining all that data, but also a community organization shouldn't be the one having to look through all that data. The city should care and should be looking through it and figuring out what's happening with, the operating permits, with the inspections, and trying to find patterns. So there are different levels. There's things that we could change at the county level as well. But I think that the city does have, you know, a really big responsibility here in this place, because we're reaching out. We're saying we need help. We're saying that, you know, we don't want to live with this situation, and we shouldn't have to fight and be pulling teeth to get someone to come out and inspect us, you know, inspect our house when we have water dripping, you know, and thinking about Juanita's story of the house that, you know, was burning down because of the stove. I mean, I had water leaking through electricity in my bathroom for a year. And every day I was just, we're gonna turn this on, it's gonna spark, this is gonna be the day we die in the shower. And it's funny, except it's not. But this is the way that we live. This is the way we live, saying today's gonna be the day. Maybe today's gonna be the day.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else? All right, thank you, Kelly. We appreciate it. All right. Last of all, we've got Justin Orson, who's just moved to Kingston in the last 3 years, has lived in 3 different parts of Kingston, so has 3 different experiences of what it's like to be a newer person moving into Kingston and finding a place to live. Thank you.
Thanks, Rennie. We're going to hope that my phone doesn't die in the middle of this. So first off, I want to just say thank you. I'm here in solidarity with Rise Up Kingston and the Kingston Tenants Union, and all of us tenants who are facing either unsafe housing conditions, unsecure housing conditions, displacement from our own neighborhoods here. And I recognize that this body here is one piece of a much larger complex issue. I thank you for the parts you all have and that we all have, but I understand that this is just a piece of it. So my own story is I moved here from Ohio about 2 years ago. This March, actually, is my 2-year anniversary. And I accidentally fell into Kingston. I had 2 weeks to find a place to move here, and just happened into Kingston by the graciousness of a homeowner here who put me up. And I fell in love with Kingston within the first week. And I started off living in Midtown and moved down to the Rondout in my first after 4 months, and then moved to Uptown after that. And so I've kind of gotten a very small glimpse of different communities. But I'll say that I've had a pretty good experience with landlords. In full disclosure, if you hadn't noticed yet, I'm a white dude and a middle-class guy, so like I've gotten a pretty good shake for the most part. So my experience, only immediately have I been directed maybe by some of the housing crisis element that some of these folks who've been courageous enough to speak today have been. But hopefully I can give a little bit more insight into the perspective as someone who is privileged and my own path of awakening to what's going on in my own community here. I think at the moment this is going to be more about how much work it takes for me to be aware of how this housing crisis is impacting many of my neighbors, and ultimately how I worry that many of us need to be doing that work a lot more, or risk losing a whole portion of our community, the community that we currently really, really love here in Kingston. So my own story is still showed the reality of the housing crisis here. I'm at the moment in a house share to make it affordable to live in Kingston with a number of really good folks, but it just so happens that we've had fellow housemates leave, come and go in the past year especially, and so have constantly put up housemate ads, and have probably fielded like emails and calls from over 100 people in the past year, all who are looking for housing in Kingston. And I'm not a landlord, but we kind of just, you know, find good folks. And I'll say the consistent theme is that people say, like, it's so hard to find an affordable space here in Kingston. That's what everybody says. And they always say, like, thank goodness at least for one house share that can make it a little bit more affordable for us. But one extra room isn't going to serve those other 100 people that don't get it. So aside from that, I too worry on my own of when my own good fortune might run out, or when the housing market's just going to raise too high here. I have my own anxieties that kind of just have continually crept up of getting priced out of Kingston. I can't imagine what it's like for other folks here in our community, but that's really real for me and for the folks I live with. Or when our landlord, who is pretty good, decides to sell our house or raise the rents. And then since the first week that I was here, I saw, the telltale signs of gentrification. I remember I went on just a drive around town with a local who was just pointing out the different historic sites, and it was a fun trip. But I just saw all these earmarks of in a hip town, a cool town, new coffee shops, new murals, a beautiful city. But was just curious. It looked very much like the hallmarks of gentrification. And from the start, and I want to be clear, I worried we talk about gentrification in a really watered down way, in a way that kind of assumes it's a natural force, kind of the changing of the seasons here. And that's, at least in the conversations we've been having, what I hear, a lot of people oh, gentrification, it's that thing that happens, it's part of what, when a place is up and coming, and then there's some downsides to it too. But I think we're disconnected from the reality that gentrification is actually displacement. And I've been trying to monitor myself and talking about it as such, because the more that I start impressing upon myself to actually see the impacts of gentrification, the more I realize that it is displacement, and that neighbors here and folks who are friends are leaving or have already had to leave. But I think my own concern is that too many of us, including myself, are disconnected from that reality. I'm grateful for these stories that we're hearing today, because I think that day in, day out experience is for far too many of us, and especially those of us in power who have a seat at the table, we're just disconnected from it. We're disconnected from those stories, and it makes it a lot harder to humanize what's going on and take account of that. Because for me, it's been the human stories for many of the folks in this room and many others that have really made me more aware of the stake I have in advocating for tenants' rights. It's forced me to take ownership of the very real harms that my neighbors are being subjected to, and that I also have a hand in creating as a part of a larger system and a problem. And so one of the questions I keep asking is, how are we holding landlords and developers and our city officials accountable while also having them own their stake in the well-being of our community, and humanizing and understanding at a very human level the people who are being impacted most by this? So that's why there's a growing movement right now of the tenants' rights movement, and this is nationwide, but we're feeling it here in Kingston too. We have the Kingston Tenants Union, Rise Up Kingston, others who are really trying to shift and bring light to what's going on. And I think we need to really be consistent with the narrative that we're focusing on, because when we're addressing the problems that are going on right now, I'm just watching the interactions, be it on the Facebook feeds or in person, and it's just inevitably part of the process is that landlords and developers and city officials and people who have power over others, intentionally or unintentionally, are feeling defensive and attacked and angry or maybe sad, and all the emotions that come up when we're addressing issues. But it's too easy for that to dominate the narrative. And the actual problems are going to be going ignored if we do that. I think we need to be clear that, us tenants, we're not attacking those people. We're not attacking landlords. We are advocating for tenants' rights, and we're really gladly welcome all who want to join us in that effort. And we are calling for landlords and developers to take a hard look at their own behaviors that harm tenants' abilities to have safe and secure housing and that cause the displacement of our neighbors and friends. And we are holding them accountable to addressing those behaviors, just as we're doing that for all of us, each of us. But I think the concern I've seen more and more is that, you know, many of us in this room have a stake in this community, likely because we're a part of it, but more and more we have a growing interest of folks who are not a part of our community who are trying to benefit from it. You know, people are really taking notice, and they have been for some years, and just it was brought up recently of this website, biggerpockets.com, one of our Kingston Tenants Unions folks, shared with us a post on there that said, somebody from Brooklyn in the past 2 months, saying on this website that's like an investment kind of opportunistic forum for folks. I saw 2 apartment buildings with a commercial space on the first floor on the Roundout section of Kingston, New York. Commercial space is going to be empty since they were paying a ridiculously cheap $450 a month for years, about 750 square feet. And the apartments are both occupied by longtime tenants on month-to-month leases, each paying $150 a month, both 1 bed, 1 bath, but the 3rd floor could be potentially converted to 2 small bedrooms, large backyard access for tenants building and commercial space, asking about $500K. I haven't spent a ton of time in this district of Kingston, but was pleasantly surprised by the amount of retail, restaurants, etc. that have popped up in the past year. From some research, it seems like these apartments are a bit underpriced. For what it's worth, I had a great feeling about the area. I like the idea of long-term rentals, but the commercial space has thrown me for a loop. Another thought was to eventually convert the top floor into a 2-bedroom Airbnb. I own an Airbnb in the Catskills, so I know the drill here. I'm missing a few numbers to pull off full analysis of this deal, which I'm working on getting now, but I wanted to throw out the questions. Given I am a complete newbie at multifamily, does this commercial space sound too risky even if the numbers work out? And then a litany of responses of how, you know, to make it work and how to build profit off of those folks. That's happening right now, and that scares me a lot. And it makes me wonder how much longer I'm going to be able to be a part of this community and how much longer many of my friends are going to be able to be a part of this community. And so on a different related note, I just want to acknowledge some of the fallacies that seem to be cropping up that I've been hearing as we're advocating for tenants' rights. The development is purely good fallacy, so why try to block development? I think some development is good, but we need to acknowledge that to effectively address the housing crisis and housing affordability, it has to be development that's addressing a housing affordability at each income level, and many of that doesn't seem to be the case currently. There's the just become a homeowner fallacy. I've heard that one. Many of our tenants have heard it in person, told to them, well, why don't we just become homeowners? And that's not to say that that's not a good path and a good route for many of us. It's something I'm curiously exploring myself, but it's a path that's just, I don't know is feasible for me. I know is not feasible for most renters, many renters, and so my question is, you know, that can't be the panacea to these issues. And related to that, as I worry that it goes unrecognized, the power differential that exists for renters in our community. You know, there's the dynamic of worrying if you'll be able to retain your housing at a very just day-to-day level. That's scary. There's the fact that, I mean, renters are less likely to vote, either by their ability to get to the polls or their ability to engage in other ways that, you know, homeowners or people who are maybe more stable can. And then often I think there's this concept that I kind of feel this sense that, like, renters are perceived as being like a less than stakeholder in the city. You know, that you have to obtain homeownership, and that kind of is claiming like that you're really a part of this city and really believe in it. And I think that doesn't do justice to the many people here who've lived here for years and years as renters and really believe in it, including myself, even though I'm young here. So I share all of that of what I've just kind of witnessed in my own just like early wanderings in with this work. I know I'm really recent into moving into this space, hearing these stories, understanding the complex solutions for these very complex problems. But it definitely, my biggest current takeaway is that it takes a lot of work, and I'm hoping that I and we keep impressing upon ourselves the work that it takes to be really aware for the people that need it in our community. So, thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Anybody have questions? I was wondering, what's your experience with credit checks? You've been in Kingston for a couple of years. What's happened in the way that landlords ask you for proof that they can trust you in terms of your ability to pay and all that?
Yeah, that's a good question. The majority of the folks I've lived with were homeowners, and so it was kind of like a Craigslisting posting. They weren't per se like landlords that were externally doing their credit checks. That's been helpful for me. People meeting in person. The most recent, my current living situation, I can't recall if we did a credit check or not, but we did have a fee, and we also had to get a realtor so we could help even find an affordable place, which we were lucky to be able to afford that. And then we were lucky that our landlord then footed the bill for that realtor fee.
And so you rent a house now, is that what I understood?
Yeah.
And is that landlord in Kingston, or does the landlord live outside of Kingston?
Yeah, the landlord's in Kingston. I think that speaks to why they're someone who really cares and is doing it the right way. It's the Shabbat of Ulster County it's one of a number of their properties, and one of their congregational members is the property manager, who's been really, really pretty accommodating. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Other questions? Yeah. Good.
No, I don't have any questions. Can I come?
Yeah.
Mm.
Go right ahead.
I do have comments, though. First of all, let me thank all of you guys for sharing your stories. I really appreciate it. And I also want you to know that please don't take my silence and not asking questions as not empathizing. Everyone that came up here and sat in that seat I can relate with. I've been a renter. I've been on DSS. I've been on Section 8. I was fortunate to have people in my life that helped propel me and move me forward to where I eventually could become a homeowner. So I'm glad that you all are here sharing your stories with us, because there are many people, as you said, that are so far removed from the situation that they don't understand. But I do understand, and that's why I'm on the council. And if I can do anything to help you, to help this housing crisis, because I do believe that it is a housing crisis that we're in right now, and if I can do anything to help anyone with that, I will do that. I have a 37-year-old daughter that is living with me right now, that has a 5-year-old son. She goes to work every day, 40 hours a week, and she cannot find affordable housing in Kingston. That's why she lives with me. And so any of these groups that came up, Rise Up Kingston, Citizen Action, that has any solutions to this problem, I won't speak for the rest of the council, but I welcome it. And so please come speak to me. And if I can share that with the members of the council, I will certainly do so. But once again, thank you very much for sharing your stories. I know it takes a lot of courage, because you put your business out there. And that already that has a stigma attached to it as well. And so I do appreciate it, and thank you.
Great, wonderful. So we have about 20 minutes, and it's pointed out last time, or earlier rather, we'll have then about 20 minutes where anybody can talk. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes. I will time you. I will give you a sign, maybe a 3, to let you know you're at the end of 3 minutes. And then also, another thing is, we've got a lot of people who have lots of different opinions, all right? So please do not respond to what anybody says. Hold on to your own comments, your own feelings, write them down, send them in a letter to yourself, send a text to yourself, but please do not engage in debate in this space. That's not what this is about. We are here to listen to people and try to understand people from very different backgrounds, all right? So I see one hand over here, another hand over here. So another hand here, that's 3. Please hold the mic. Even if it doesn't work, it'll be the talking stick.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Hello? Oh, well, I'll speak loud.
Speak loud, yeah.
Okay. I am here about something a little different, but every homeowner and every tenant should listen closely to what I have to say. And that is, Central Hudson has been slowly and stealthily removing your analog meters and replacing them with digital electronic utility meters. All right, these things can be hacked. Spies can spy into our house because of those. They cause fires. We read about fires every day in the newspaper. A lot of these fires are caused by these digital utility meters, which are being put on our houses. And next, the digital electronic meters on our apartments and our houses are emitting very strong electromagnetic radiation. And I'm just going to read what description. You and I are exposed to intense pulses of electromagnetic radiation from this transmitting utility meters from Central Hudson every 10 to 20 seconds, 9,000 to 190,000 times a day. All right. Radiation causes all kinds of illnesses: cancer, heart disease, diabetes, dizziness, vision problems. Just everywhere on your body is affected. And so my apartment complex, let's take it to me. All right, I live in a very nice apartment complex. All goes well there. I'm just a little, all right, no, I won't say that. All goes well. Oh, I got to keep it short. Okay, so every building in my complex has had about 15 to 20 smart meters put on the buildings. And there are people living just on the other side of the wall. They were put in my building in the boiler room, and there's an apartment right next door. And that poor girl is getting blasted with electromagnetic radiation when she's home from work, evenings and weekends. And there's an apartment upstairs. They're getting blasted directly. And I took a meter to the old analog meters before they were removed, and the reading on the meter was just a little flicker. And I went into the boiler room when the utility meters were installed, and the reading was off the chart. So the analog meters that are on your houses are safe. They've been safe for 50 years. Nobody's ever complained about an analog meter. Okay, so I want to ask the mayor, the aldermen and alderwomen to ask Central Hudson and ask the Public Service Commission to urge Central Hudson to allow our residents here in Kingston and all over New York State, for that matter, to permission to keep their analog meter, or if their analog meter was taken away by Central Hudson and replaced with this digital utility meter, to request that an analog meter, refurbished analog meter, be put on their house. And Central Hudson isn't allowing it, but other cities and states and other utility companies do allow it. So we have to let Central Hudson be our friend and give us the analog meters back, and don't take them away.
All right, thank you. Over here. Here, you can use this microphone. Again, I don't know if it's actually doing anything. Just talk loud.
Can everyone hear me?
You got 3 minutes.
Okay, my name is Holly Christiana. I am someone who lives in Kingston and am chronically looking for a place to live. I have been housing insecure my entire life. I cannot tell you the number of apartments I have looked at that had the refrigerator in the living room. I have looked at apartments where the landing was counted as the living room so that they could call the living room a bedroom. I've looked at apartments where there was rubble in the hallways as if it was a bombed out building, but it wasn't a bombed out building. Where did the concrete rubble come from? I have no idea. Why wasn't it cleaned up? I can't say. I've lived in apartments that have made me cry when I had no choice but to accept that that was where I had to live. I have been able to turn down apartments that have made me cry, knowing that other people would not be able to say no. I think this whole process right here is a little bit of a sham. I'm not saying thank you. Since 2008, rental need has increased 25% nationwide. It is certainly no less in this city. If you read the Daily Freeman, which you all do, you will see there is nothing for rent. If you look on Craigslist, there is nothing for rent. Rents are not remotely affordable to what the jobs are in this county, and yet I'm in this room with a common council who is talking, I'm going to swear now, pardon me, a goddamn park in honor of a post office that they want to take $500,000 out of the reserve fund for, when we have people in the city all over who can't afford diapers. You all know this. This isn't news. 10 years ago or whenever, we had a study done. God knows how much it cost. Said we needed 1,000 affordable apartments built. We've had roughly 55. Okay? Community Development Board last year gave no money for eviction prevention, and I had to fight hard to get them to give $10,000 to legal aid this year for them to get it. On that same board, I was accused as a renter of not paying taxes. More than half the people in Kingston are renters. That means more than half of our property taxes and school taxes are paid by renters, because there isn't a landlord here who doesn't figure that into their rental fees. We pay the taxes in this county. We pay the majority of the taxes in this city. We deserve to be spoken to. We don't deserve. There are more slumlords in Kingston and Ulster County. I don't know where there's more. We don't have modern apartments. We don't have little small conveniences like washer-dryer hookups or dishwashers. We don't have walk-in closets because everything is old and run down and crooked. And if you look on Craigslist and you see apartments that 3 or 4 years ago were $900 a month, now they're $1,400, $1,500, you say to yourself, well, surely they've at least fixed them up. No, they've slapped a coat of paint on. They've stuck up a couple cabinets they got off Craigslist, but they haven't fixed them up. We're just paying a lot more for those same apartments. I called the assessor's office today to ask how many homes there are in Kingston. He didn't know the answer off the top of his head. I said, City of Kingston has this whole big study going on right now. Nobody's asked you to get the number of homes in this city together? No, nobody had. Seems to me a pertinent piece of information. I think that as a council and as a city, we need to stop worrying about traffic circles on roads in a city where every road is an axle breaker. We need to stop worrying about a rail trail when people people who use strollers, people pushing babies in strollers, people who use walkers are walking in the street because sidewalks aren't just bent, they're buckled and crazed. And it looks like my time is up. I'm sorry that I'm so upset, but I am upset.
I just want to mention a couple things that people have brought up to maybe shed a little bit more light on a few things. Somebody talked about like somebody getting kicked out from Central Hudson doing a shared meter check. The state law says that the landlord is fined if they don't allow access during a shared meter check. It's regulated by New York State, so if that didn't happen, then the district attorney should have been involved. Like there should be other legal recourse that should have forced that landlord to allow someone in. I mean, I've gone through Central Hudson shared meter checks myself. It's not that big of a deal. They come in, they make sure that everybody's meters are just monitoring their own stuff, yeah. So anyway, that's already regulated, and you know, a lot of the things that have been brought up, there's already statutes that like require, like, you know, landlords to maintain a certain level of like repair on their building. We've talked a lot about building safety. I really hope that like Steve Knox and everybody over there gets a lot of this information, so that I know they're really trying to maybe reorganize what's going on in building safety. But there are code violations. I mean, you can walk down the street and pick out dozens and dozens, hundreds of code violations all the time. They're not enforced. You know, the city hasn't really been doing that forever. You know, as long as I've been you know, a homeowner and invested in properties in the city of Kingston, I mean, I all the time I walk into properties that have had all kinds of building violations. You know, where we look at to acquire a new property, I'll call the building department and ask them when the last time it had a fire inspection is, and they don't even have it on record. You know, which means that for at least 15 years, nobody's been in there to do it. You're supposed to do it every 2 years. The fire inspection is kind of a joke. We talked about this a little bit already. They just come in and make sure that there's smoke detectors there. It's not actually a building safety check that they do every 2 years. It's just a fire inspection check. So there could be lots of other code violations that no one pays any attention to. They're not written up. They're not followed up on. You know, again, I know that there's a lot of things that are happening, you know, in the city that's, you know, maybe there's a little bit of shakeup there, but that's certainly something that needs to be addressed. Credit checks, as far as I know, any person that does a credit check on you, you are allowed by federal statute to request a copy of that credit check. So if somebody charges you a fee, when you're looking at an apartment in order to, and it says that it's for a credit check fee, you are allowed by law to request a copy of that. So, you know, if somebody's just sitting there collecting fees, I mean, I'm sure that there's predatory people out there trying to do stuff like that. But you should at least, you know, if you request that that report and somebody doesn't give it to you, then you know, call the district attorney and complain. That's it. Who's next?
Hello. Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity. And I have to agree with some of the presentation this evening, but it was said there's an action for every action. And there is action for the tenants. It also is with the landlord. There would be no action for the tenant if it wasn't the landlord. The landlord has obligations, as well as the tenant has obligations. The tenants are being priced out of apartments. The landlords are being priced out of existence. I mean, the taxes, this lady said the taxes, she's absolutely right. These taxes have gone up in 4 years, okay, tremendously, okay? You know, I mean, I don't want to bring this issue to this table now, because come to the council meeting where I will present it and tell you why the taxes have gone up, okay? Now, they also said, you know, you get your 3-day notice to move, you're paying rent after that. It's against the law for the landlord, after your 30 days, after your 3 days notice, you have 30 days to move out. It's against the law for the landlord to touch your belongings and put them out in the street without a court order. Okay? So now he has to, you know, he could say that, a month-to-month tenancy, you got 30 days to move out, yeah, sure. But, you know, you need a court order to evict anybody. And you have to go before a judge. And a judge usually sympathizes with the tenant and not the landlord, okay? Because they realize the tenant is, well, I don't want to say ignorant, but ignorant to the laws. So they're more favorable to favor them and lead them along the path and ask them questions. I know this through experience. Also, if you waited for the landlord, are you still paying rent? If you're being evicted, are you still paying rent? They say you don't get your securities back, but you're not paying rent. Okay? Time the landlord can get anybody out of an apartment, it takes 3 months or better. He's going to get you out in 30 days. He's going to get you out overnight. And to put a little levity into this conversation about the meters, Central Hudson's not going to do anything until you start glowing in the dark. Okay? And I thank you.
Yes, it is. It is, and I'll be brief. Yes, definitely. Okay, all right. I've been renting at a pretty good place, but every year the rent goes up astronomically. And last year, when it went up $50 for the year, every year the lease, there's a rent increase. It went up $50, and I asked, is this a joke? And she said, no, it's not a joke. But, so anyway, at the tenants meeting that we had a couple months ago, we had an expert from New York City or Long Island or someplace about tenants, and I asked her, what's the percentage of rate increase that's customary for an annual lease? And she said 1 or 2%. So I live in an apartment complex here, and people struggle. 2 working people struggle to maintain an apartment. They don't spend money or go out or do anything, the people in my apartment complex. They're home every night cooking dinner. And it's a struggle. And then people, when they can, they move out to low-income apartments. But it's not a pretty scene when the rate goes up. People can't afford to stay there. And then the LED lights. I just want to say there are major health problems with LED lights. And I'll talk about that another time.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And come to the council meeting.
He's next. Oh.
I was just going to ask I was just going to float kind of a hypothetical question just to see. I grew up in this area, but I did have the privilege of living in a ski town for a little bit, and ski towns are interesting places because they've been dealing with housing crisis for a while in a much less humane level, in that you have billionaires buying out the millionaires. But some of the interesting stuff is these ski towns try to enact land banks in different towns. You're dealing with some of the wealthiest developers in the world who would essentially sue the towns and would essentially go to battle with a town that has a very small amount of money to fight these developers with lawyers. And so what I'm curious is, as we move forward and we know that we're starting to attract bigger and bigger developers, how do we actually fight these guys? Like, the laws are on their side, and that you can't actually tell someone what they can do in a town with their own money. And so we can have these conferences and we can get together and talk, but we're watching this happen everywhere. And the truth is, when are we going to actually realize that it might be bigger than the laws? It might be different ways of looking at this, because this is happening with everywhere. And so how are we if we're a town that can't fix sidewalks, and some major developer comes in and decides to sue the city of Kingston, how do we fight back with that? And so now you're essentially being held hostage, your entire town, by some developer. And we think we have power. And the truth is, we really don't. And we really have to realize that if we don't do something very quickly and critically, we're going to lose all control of our towns. And it's happening in many towns. Go to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. The billionaires have bought the town out. It's a tax haven. They own it. They own the laws. And it's happening everywhere. And we really have to wake up and understand how critical these issues really are. So thank you very much.
Okay. Yes, thank you. Just a point of information here. It's unfair to single out all of our city officials and offices. Some of these problems are not city-related. I believe that the county, be it DSS, or whoever else can listen to you should be brought here to the table, and hopefully some of the problems could be ironed out. It's not all our problem in the city. It could very well be straightened out through the county. Thank you.